Okay, let me start by just saying welcome to the channel. This video is called Locking the Box, and the subject of this video is privacy. So, I guess the best way to begin with this is to just face the fact that in this day and age, we are dealing with mass surveillance. And this includes our cell phones, our computers, and the internet. So, as a whole, this is a huge multi-layered problem. It's not easy to unravel, nor address for that matter. This video will be focused on some basic steps that the average person can take to mitigate your personal information being compromised. And to begin, I just want to kind of go into why any of this matters. I mean, most of us know that we're being monitored and tracked these days, and a very common argument or statement that you hear concerning this is sort of nihilistic, and people will say, oh, well, I have nothing to hide, so it doesn't matter. So I want to address part of that to begin with here. Thing is, there again, no matter who you are, no matter what belief system you follow or political groups you support, you are a target of this mass surveillance. And the worst part of this is that beyond just being targeted and being tracked, you're being actively manipulated by companies that are complicit in this deception, and they're profiting off of you basically. So some of the main contenders here obviously are Facebook and Google, which is also now YouTube because Google owns YouTube. We're also talking about Twitter and TikTok. Basically, these major social networking sites that everyone flocks to and everyone uses. And the thing is, as a user of these platforms, you're providing them the means to stay afloat and the means to profit from your engagement by giving them the data that they can collect and archive and sell. Now, you might say, oh, my profile is private, or, whatever company that we're talking about here wouldn't sell my data. The thing is, that's not really true, but even if it were, because of the climate that we're in now, there are other third-party companies that basically have the technology to scrape these websites and gather the data for themselves. So even if for whatever insane reason, were to trust that Facebook wasn't misusing your data, some other company out there is going to Facebook and gathering the data and still manipulating it and profiting from it. So you're not really going to get around that by continuing to use sites like Facebook. So yeah, in the end, you are being tracked. Your data is being exploited, and you're the product, basically. An even deeper thing that I think is much more horrific than just that, someone profiting from your data. These services that are being provided on these sites are basically at this point engineered to keep you there. They're engineered to keep you clicking, to keep you engaged on the platform. And what this illustrates is that no matter what these companies say about, oh, they have a good, customer service thing going on and they really care about you as a user, that is bullshit. What they care about is getting more and more of your data and more of your attention because that means more and more money for them. And that is what they care about. That's just the greater truth there. So, but I mean, that's horrendously, bad tactics for any kind of business because basically they're exploiting some basic instincts that human beings have, that desire for community, that desire for networking and connecting with others, and also the desire that we have to express ourselves in a creative way, these companies know that, and they're like, oh, hey, we can get people here and then, make money from that. And so they do. And that continues. So the first step, I would say, to quote unquote locking the box and trying to secure some of your data is stop using all of these sites and platforms. You can find an alternative means of keeping in touch with family and friends. That could be a whole nother video, and I'm not going to go into that right now. But definitely, I would say don't just jump on the next popular thing, because there again, if it's not secure, your data is still being leaked and your messages and all of that. So bear that in mind. But yeah, another thing is you can't trust companies like Google and Gmail, because there again, your data is not secure. I read an article, something a while back. There were several Google employees that were fired because they had accessed customer data. Now, how can Google claim to be so secure and like such a good email provider if their own employees can get in and read your emails? Like, I don't, that doesn't seem very trustworthy to me. So I would say maybe don't use Gmail for your primary. Now, having said that, because Google owns YouTube now, in order to be a content creator on YouTube, you have to have a Gmail. So I have a Gmail. But the thing is, I'm only ever going to use that Gmail for this YouTube account. And, unless something major happens to my account, like I don't even need to ever go there. So, it's one of those things where that company bought the other company out, so to some degree you're forced to use it. But even in that scenario, you can minimize the amount of usage, which there again minimizes the amount of data that you give to these companies. So, yeah, another thing, there again, YouTube has some really horrendous practices, and that itself could be a whole nother video. One thing I will say though is that there is a good notion in the sense that now you can find various front ends that you can use, basically other websites that you can use to access data and videos on YouTube without using their website. And I am going to do a future video that displays some of this information and particularly shows like the RAM usage of going to one of these other sites versus going to YouTube. It's startling. Like, and it's simply because of all this like tracking and spyware and crap that they've put in their site, like in the code for the web pages. Like it makes your computer and your browser run overtime, and it's unneeded and it's outrageous. So yeah, definitely, you can find some interesting things, some information, and meaningful stuff on YouTube, but use another platform that's a little more respecting of you as a user if you're going to access that content. So, yeah, um, now that we've gone over some of that stuff, kind of clarify why data privacy is important, we can move on here in a minute to actually locking the box. Another thing I will say though, before we go quite that far, the reason I mentioned that is that it's important to understand that this data is being misused, and if you are convinced at the end of this video to say stop using Facebook, at some point or another, your family or your friends are going to come to you and be like, "Hey, what happened to your Facebook account? Like what's going on?" So, in my opinion, it's good to already kind of have an idea of what you're going to say to them. And at least for me, basically it boils down to like, I don't want my data to be the means for, the people who run these companies to go to the Bahamas, and stay for a month or whatever. Most of us here in America, especially like middle class and lower, we are struggling to buy groceries for ourselves. And these people are exploiting something that they're trying to give us and say, oh, this is a free service and it'll help you and it'll benefit you. But they don't care about you. They're just making money off of you. And I think until, there's a huge exodus of users from places like Facebook and stuff like that, it's just going to continue and it's going to get worse, unfortunately. So yeah, that's my 2 cents there. Definitely, I would say leave these large platforms, because yeah, they're not looking out for you and they don't care about you, regardless of what they say or what they claim. Okay, so beginning steps of locking the box. I would start with operating systems. And This in and of itself could be a whole entire separate video, but I'll try to keep this as small and short as possible. Basically, if you use Windows, you are using spyware. There's so much in Windows that constantly like phones out across the internet, either to Microsoft or who knows what places. I mean, I personally haven't tracked all of it, but I can suggest to you there is a program that you can find online. I wrote the name of it down here on the notes. Give me one moment here. Yeah, okay, Simple Wall. This runs on Windows and you can download it. Basically, it's a internet and network traffic monitoring system. And you can download that, install it on your Windows and run it and see for yourself. Even when you're not online browsing or doing anything with the internet or networking, the system itself, the OS, and it doesn't matter if you're using Windows 7 or 8 or 10 or 11, they all do this. They are sending information about your operating system at the very least, and like programs. Data is leaking out of your box because of the operating system that you're using. So, yeah, I would highly recommend that you go online and find a Linux distribution that you think is going to meet your needs and download and install that instead. That's my 2 cents there. One thing I will say, as far as Linux is concerned, there's really big debates about, oh, Linux can be complicated for someone who's used to using Windows. It's hard to install stuff. There is give and take. I can say, having used some different Linux distributions, that I haven't noticed that phoning out like you do find in Windows. And another thing with Linux is that you can get some very minimal distributions that will run on really old hardware. Right now, I'm using one, and I mean, it'll run. I can browse the net and watch a YouTube video, and my RAM usage is only like 500 megabytes, which is insane compared to what it would be like if you were running a browser in Windows 11 trying to do something online. Yeah, I wouldn't even want to compare the two, but so yeah, some of the minimal Linux distributions run really well, and they're not full of bloatware, and they're not trying to send data from your machine out to some unknown place across the web. So something to bear in mind. But that's my first step. I would say stop using Windows and and find a version of Linux that you think will work for you. Another thing I will say, just I'll quit harping about Linux, I mean Windows here in a second, but there's recently some information that came out. Basically, Germany has banned the use of Microsoft Office in their schools because of the amount of data that the software was sending back to Microsoft. So, I mean, if you're a software company and some country out there is banning your product because you're sending users' data out across the wire, that's maybe a sign that, like, you're doing something wrong or that people should avoid your product. Like, do not trust Microsoft because there again, they don't care about you, they care about your data and what they can get from you. So, okay, the bulk of the rest of this is going to be just straightforward, the tools that you can use, and this is going to concern Linux. I may do another video in the future about Windows. Excuse me. I'm not sure. But yeah, we're going to move ahead now with Linux. So let me bring up my browser here. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, so the first program that I would suggest that you install once you get a Linux distribution put on your system is UFW. And a lot of distributions will have this installed ahead of time, but oftentimes for some reason or another, it's not enabled. So there are some commands that you can use to go in and turn it on, uh, but I will include the links to these sites so that you can get all the information that you want. But basically, this is just a very simple firewall. Now, the good thing about UFW is that there's a graphical user interface. It's called GUFW, and it allows you to have an easier way of setting up rules for your firewall where basically you say, oh, well, I only want traffic in and out of this specific port. I want these other ports blocked, I'll show you if I can find it here, like the user interface right here. You see. So, I mean, there's a lot that you can do even with this simple firewall. You can say, like I've got mine set up right now, I don't want anything coming in unless I specifically allow it. And outgoing, I have it set to allow, but I have a lot of rules set up in mine so that, I can monitor what goes in and out. But yeah, like it's easy to use. It's a very simple program, but it will help you to, as I say, quote unquote, lock the box. So yeah, UFW is the first thing that I would say add. Moving forward, I would consider adding IFTop. Now, IFTop is a fairly simple, program that you can use to monitor your network traffic coming in and out. Now you can see here in this screenshot, it's showing on the left the operating system, whichever one you happen to be using, and on the right, it's showing ingoing and outgoing traffic, like where is your system connecting to and what's happening. Now, on my system, I use a VPN, but I also use this IFTop every day. It's always running and always on my system and always in a part where I can see it. So that way, if I decide to go on the net and browse or something, then I can look over there and watch the traffic and see what my browser is doing and see what my system is doing. And on my setup, all I see is my connection to my VPN. And I mean, that gives me a little bit of peace of mind because it lets me know what my system is doing and whether or not my data is going in and out. And if there is any outgoing connections, where is it going? You know. So yeah, IFTop is great for that. Another thing that I would suggest that you do in conjunction with that is download a program called Wireshark. Now, Wireshark is very advanced and it can be very complicated. But even someone, who's just a layman, someone who has very little knowledge of this stuff, you can download, install, and use Wireshark and basically use it as a buffer. What I'm saying is download it and install it, and then use the tool we talked about a second ago, IFTop, in conjunction with Wireshark and compare the two. They're both a way for you to monitor your network. But when you use both of them together, you can make sure that the first tool, IFTop, isn't missing something. Because, like I said, Wireshark is more advanced. It will show you more information. There's so much that you could do with Wireshark. I'm not super familiar with it, but I've used it enough to get an idea. So definitely I would say have those two. That way you make sure that you're not just running one tool and depending on it, because if there's an error there or if it's not working correctly or you simply don't know how to use it, then you have no idea whether or not, anything shady or weird is going on. So yeah, I would use those two. And once you get those two installed, then you move into that whole area of finding and choosing a decent browser. And that is yet another part of this privacy issue that is complicated and probably needs its own video. I'm pretty certain I'm going to do a video about browsers at some point in the future, so you can look for that on the channel. For right now, though, for this example, obviously I'm using Firefox here. And Firefox is a decent browser if you really go in and fine tune the settings. And what I'm getting at is that once you get a browser that you think you can trust, oh, excuse me, get a browser that you think you can trust, and then find a VPN that you trust. Yeah, that's a whole nother story as well. Some VPNs are better than others. The main thing that you want to do there is do some research and make sure that the VPN you choose, as far as you can find out or know, isn't also selling your data. Because if they are, then you're wasting your time leaving Facebook if you're using a VPN that's just taking all of your traffic and selling it somewhere. So there again, find a VPN that you trust. Find a browser that you think is going to work well for you and what you need to do with the web, and then go and check. There's a lot of websites you can use to check to see whether or not your browser is working correctly and if your VPN is working correctly. So I'm just going to click on a couple of these here to show you what it looks like. So if I click this one here, this first one, It'll open up this window and it's going to tell me what my IP address is. Now, obviously, this is not my IP address. This is the IP address of the VPN that I'm using. Now, you see here it says IPv4 and the same here. Now, one thing I'll mention concerning that, there's also another protocol called IPv6. I don't use that. But if you don't properly configure your VPN in your browser, then you may have a thing that comes up over here next to this that says IPv6, and that will oftentimes actually leak your real IP address. So you want to be attentive to that. The same thing with this right here, where it says your IP address and then it says WebRTC detection. In Firefox at least, you have to go into the config of Firefox and modify this so that you don't have a leak there. Now, let me just put this disclaimer out there. When I'm talking about modifying Firefox and doing some of this stuff, it may sound technical to someone who's not used to working with computers. But the great thing about the internet these days is that you can basically look up any information, so I mean, it took me all of maybe like 5 minutes to learn and then copy what I needed to know to like fix the web RTC detection problem that I was having to start with. So, I mean, it's not as hard. You just have to put forth effort if you actually want to, protect your identity and your data from, being tracked everywhere you go online. So, something to bear in mind. Let me go back and I'll show you another site that I use that has pretty good testing. Let's see, this place here, browserleaks.com. It's pretty good. We'll click that. Now you can see yet again it's showing the VPN IP address and host name. All this is the VPN stuff. Also, this is another thing, DNS leak test. There again, if your stuff isn't properly configured, you will be leaking data even if you're using a VPN. So that's something to be mindful of. But I can click here and run this test and wait and see the results. You see, it's still showing the VPN, which is what you want to see. And I would advise, if you're serious about privacy and your data, you want to do these checks at least once a week. I mean, it takes less than 2 minutes to load a site, check to see if it's showing the right IP address, not yours, but whatever VPN you're using, and then go on with your business. Like, you don't have to worry about it. As far as browsers and being online and all that, that in and of itself, like I said, is really complicated. You also want to take into consideration things like browser fingerprinting and whether or not you have Java installed. There again, there's some complexity involved, but if you do your own research, you can find out everything that you need to know as far as combating these techniques that these companies are using to try to track people, and harvest their data. So, at the end of that rant, basically what I'm saying is it is possible to, do what you can to sort of undermine these really bad practices that these companies have and are using now. So definitely, I would say don't give up hope. Um, I would also mention here, avoid using cookies whenever possible. You can use things like NoScript, and there are like user agent spoofing add-ons that you can get for your browser. So there's things that you can do to sort of maintain more privacy as you're browsing the web. One final thing that I will say here, and this is yet another topic that deserves its own video. I would highly suggest do not use Google for your search engine. Um, I mean, for lots and lots of reasons, mainly because there again, Google tracks everything that you do, but also like their results are pretty biased. And if you're concerned about privacy and stuff, and you're wanting to look for something, if Google considers your search query to not fit to their agenda, whether that be social or political or whatever, there's a likelihood that what you get back in your results is not going to lead you where you want to go. So yeah, as alternatives, I would say you can use Mojeek. That's another search engine. They're okay. As a fallback, you could use DuckDuckGo, and DuckDuckGo used to be a great sort of alternative search engine, but I've heard recently that some of their decisions are sort of shining the light in the extent that maybe they're not as great as they claimed, or that maybe they don't, they're not as concerned about user privacy as they should be, or, there's some shady stuff going on there. But I would much rather use DuckDuckGo as a fallback than Google. So that's my 2 cents. There are other search engines beyond the ones that I've mentioned here in this video. So there again, do your own research and, find one that works for you. Like I said at the beginning of this video, this isn't meant to be, oh, this is going to fix privacy for you, because privacy is such a huge, sort of tangled web. This is solely focusing on your machine, your computer. It doesn't really matter whether you're on a laptop or a PC, pretty much applies. Depending on how you're connecting to the net, it can get more complex. But I may do further videos in the future about your phone and things of that nature. We'll just kind of see how it plays out. But yeah, I would say to each of you, stop using these major social media networks, because there again, you're just allowing yourself to be a product for these people, and you're making them rich, and what they give you for your time and attention is nothing. I mean, they provide a service that's sort of engineered to be addictive so that you'll stay there all the time. So that's taking time out of your life, and they're making money from you, and you're actually a victim. They are victimizing you every time that you use their service. So yeah, leave Google, leave Facebook, and Twitter, Instagram, all just like leave. Mass exodus. Now, some of you are probably going to say, well, if I do all that, then what's left? Like, I mean, there are some alternatives, and if you do some research here, you can easily find some of those. I will say, via my own opinion, that I don't know that any of the alternatives are very attractive either. But I am going to do a video in the future that sort of talks about what I think personally might be a decent approach. So you can look forward to that as well. I know this video has ran long. There was a whole lot to cover. So there again, thank you for your time and attention. As I said, your data and your privacy, both of these things are important. So please try to do what you can to make those more secure. And I hope all this information was helpful, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.